but we are at the appropriate distances, of course, from one another. So we're going to make this work. We've already done the dry run. So we have two agendas that we're going to be dealing with today. One is under the heading of Special Council Agenda. And again, really what it is to deal with the tools that the province of Ontario has given us to conduct a council meeting electronically. And I personally want to thank the province for doing this. So I wouldn't go so far to say it's business as usual, but very, very close to it, just because of all of our presence here electronically. So following that agenda announcements, Madam Clerk, are there any amendments on this first part of the agenda?
Not for this agenda portion.
Not for this agenda. Any disclosure by any member of council? And again, I'm going to work on an assumption, assuming that there's none. That'll be noted. Items for consideration. Staff report CORS-19-20 and starting on page 1. And this is a bylaw to amend procedure bylaw 07-2019 in relation to Municipal Emergency Act 2020. And members of council, each one of you have that report. Are there any questions on that report? And again, I'm assuming that there are none, and I'm assuming now, unless I hear different, that all of you are in favor of that. And I'm listening very carefully. Is there any objections? Being none, then that's carried. Clerk has brought across to me the resolution that has been moved by Councillor Malbou and seconded by Councillor Chandler, and be it resolved the council pass a bylaw to amend procedure bylaw 007-2019 to allow electronic participation of council members pursuant to the Municipal Emergency Act 2020. Any questions? We okay there, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay. I will assume then that everyone is in favor of that motion unless I hear differently. And that's carried unanimously. Next resolution is moved by Councillor Chandler, second by Councillor Malbou, and be it resolved the bylaws numbers 015-2020 and 016-2020 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, sealed with a seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Any questions on the reading of these bylaws? On the assumption then that there are none, I will declare that motion carried unanimously. Madam Clerk, I believe agenda number 1 that completes that. Have we missed any, or is that it for session number 1 under special council? That's it, members of council. Now we'll move into the regular council agenda. And of course, starting off, and again, as I had mentioned at the outset, we're attempting to keep this as professional as possible and not deviating from what we normally do. So I'm going to suggest at this moment, and however we're situated, however we're seated, I would suggest we remain seated in our position. So this moment, I want to have a moment of silent reflection and then our national anthem, O Canada. And after the moment of silent reflection, I've got my trusty little gavel here, and that will indicate our national anthem will be played. Moment of silent reflection. And I thank you very much for that. And again, following our agenda, disclosures of conflict of interest. Any member of council, any disclosures? And again, recording, none.
Just have one announcement.
Okay, announcements, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. With regard to consent item number 4, which is staff report course 1320, we did receive a delegation submission from Building, Industry, and Land Development Association, which has been distributed to members of council.
Okay, and Madam Clerk, can I assume for a moment that members of council maybe has an opportunity to see this? I know I have a copy, but in front of me. And for Bill.
Yes.
So members of council, you will have that from Bill dated March the 30th, of course, which is today, addressed to mayor and members of council. So with that, and again, there might be a comment on that. Now, item number 4, when we get to that, Glenn Cowan is going to expand on that report a bit. But before I get to Glenn, is there any other item that any member of council was pulled out and dealt with separately on those 6 items that's under consent?
I see
Councillor Hamid, I believe that you have your hand up on what item?
Yes, question on item number 3, please.
Any other member of council, any item that he or she wishes pulled out and dealt with separately? Again, I already indicated 4 will be pulled out and dealt with separately. Nothing further? Okay, Councillor Hamid, if you would on 3.
Yeah, just a quick question. I mean, I think I know the answer. Just wanted to clarify that we're changing the eligibility of organizations, but program eligibility stays same, right?
Okay, I think Madam Clerk or Mr. CEO. Christine, Scott, if you would maybe respond to that, please.
Hi, everyone. Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Councillor Hamid, that is correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is there anything further on 3? If not, we'll move on then. Glenn, if you'd be so kind then to expand on item number 4, keeping in mind that we do have that letter from Dean, you might want to address your thoughts on that as well.
Yes, and for those who may not have had a chance to read the letter yet, Bill is highlighting just some of the pressures related to the COVID pandemic and the resulting implications on the industry. Their request is that indexing be deferred until there's more stability post-COVID. So what I'd like to do is just update council on a couple things, because as with a couple topics, this one has been just developing quickly and just recently. So just going back to the end of Friday last week, there was a discussion amongst the municipalities with Halton related to indexing and alternatives that might be available. We are recommending that we proceed with the indexing. It is an important revenue tool for the town in terms of ensuring we've got sufficient funding to pay for the construction costs as they are changing. And it is based on the changes in the actual construction index. What we are suggesting, though, is something that the region has been putting together. That was the nature of the call on Friday, is to walk the local municipalities through it. So at this stage, I don't know with certainty exactly how or if the other municipalities will use it, but we are suggesting it's something we should do. And essentially what we would do is we would have a Section 27 agreement under the Development Charges bylaw, which would allow us to enter an agreement with any applications in the month of April, recognizing, and it would be really intended to capture those developments that may have run into some timing challenges in the month of March. So even though we as a town were continuing to process applications and permits during the month, we recognize that the industry may have run into challenges on their side in terms of being able to complete some of the information and steps along the way. So through these agreements, we would essentially be allowing for an additional month at the old rates through the Section 27 agreements, recognizing, as I mentioned, that some firms may have run into some timing challenges leading up to the April 1st date. Our staff had been working with all the active developments and applications, trying to process as many as could be processed in advance of the indexing. And so there are a few others that may carry over, and this would capture that. So in a nutshell, it may not go as far as what the letter submitted by Build is requesting in terms of a complete deferral of the indexing itself. This would buy time for those that were already in the process and had a potential to have made it in before the pre-indexed rates or the indexing rates occurred, that they could still maintain those. And ideally, it'll provide consistency with the other municipalities in Halton as well, just knowing that they're still reviewing the option themselves and haven't made any decisions as well. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it to you and answer any questions there may be.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Again, members of council, any questions or comments to Glenn on his overview on item number 4? Okay, I'm seeing none. So Glenn, you are recommending that we stay the course as the item number 4 recommends, no change?
Yes, and we would have this alternate process that we would do to manage the permits that come in through the month of April.
Okay, with that, then is there anything further on item number 4? Not, then I will assume moving forward with it. And I have a resolution moved by Councillor Chelner and second by Councillor Melboof, and be it resolved that consent items number 1 to 6 be approved. Any questions on any one of those items? Being none, I will assume that everyone is in favor of that resolution unless I hear otherwise. That motion is carried. Next is the staff report, CORS 2020, and I do have a mover and a seconder on that. But before we get to deal with this one, I think, Glenn, again, this is far-reaching, and again, I personally support what's being advocated, and I'll read the resolution in just a few moments, but if you could give a high profile on the reasons for what we're hoping to do. So Glenn?
Sure, thank you. So the first thing that I think is really important to highlight is that the recommendations contained here have been developed in consultation with the region and the other municipalities as we're trying to have a consistent approach within the region. It has also been changing quickly, and up to last Wednesday, we got certainty with respect to the timing of the remittances we need to make to the region. At Regional Council, it was approved at a 60-day deferral. And then later on that day, the school boards also announced, in their case, it would be a 90-day deferral in terms of when we have to in turn make the payments to them for their portions. We did look at a number of different alternatives with respect to the form and the means of providing some form of relief. And we do think that the approach that was consistently landed on between the different municipalities is an appropriate one. We did provide, just for transparency for council, identification of some of those other considerations within the report. There is a net cost of $336,000 associated with the program, largely due to the waiving of fees, fines, and penalties. To a smaller degree, it has to do with some of the investment return from the timing difference, but it really is more on the fee side. And so to understand that, it's probably also important and maybe timely just to provide a bit of a high-level update on the bigger picture when it comes to the financial implications of the entire situation. So we are at the stage where we've done an initial assessment of the impacts up to April 5th and 6th, which was kind of that first key time period in terms of our transition and our planning in terms of service delivery. We are still going to be working further on the numbers as program staff have a little more opportunity to be consulted with, as our first priority to date has been the operational side. But I think the important things for council to be aware of is the estimated initial impact that we're estimating for the time is in the order of about $1.1 million. That takes into account a couple different offsets that we have in the way of things like utility savings and fuel savings for the period. The main drivers are revenue losses. So we're not seeing extra costs necessarily in terms of response to the pandemic. There's some minor items. But the three main drivers are things like the tax report, and I should be clear, the 1.1 does include the cost of the tax deferral as you see in front of you. But then it's also things like facility rental permit revenue and program revenues where we're seeing it as well. There are some mitigations that we have. One report we were intending to bring tonight, but it's been deferred till April, is our year-end report for 2019. So what council wouldn't have seen yet is that we have a projected $1.2 million surplus from last year, which we would have been recommending to put into the stabilization reserve. So that is one funding tool that we can use to help offset the one-time initial impact. We also have other things like we've received more provincial gas tax for the year than originally anticipated. We'll have some winter control savings as well. So in terms of the one-time impact, we do have some tools and some options available. The next step and the thing that we continue to work through is the planning for post-April 5th. And there's a number of considerations there with respect to service delivery, with respect to the organization and the human resources side, as well as just keeping in mind what the financial forecasting looks like. So we will be back with more information on that at a later time. But in terms of the initial period where there was a bit of a higher level of cost and impact, there are tools that will be available for council. I do have other notes related to some of the other broader implications in terms of things like cash flow, the impacts on the investment returns in the market. Maybe I'll just hold off on those because I think the key thing was just getting that understanding of the overall impacts to date and some of those tools that we have as we balance those. So with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn. I know that all of my colleagues are aware of the resolution that we're going to be dealing with in just a very short period of time, but I do have a speakers list, and we're going to go in this order. Councillor Malboof, Councillor Chalmers, and Councillor Tesser-Dirksen in that order. Councillor Malboof, you're first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just clarification on if a ratepayer finds it necessary to defer their tax payment, do they have to put a request? How is that going to work? Because, you know, some people may not want their taxes deferred to keep up. Others may need it. So what's going to be the process as to how somebody gets their taxes deferred and how do we catch up?
Sure. So it will depend on the form of payment, and we'll have some frequently asked question documents that we're going to post online to help ratepayers as well. If someone is in, most people fall, the majority are in the installment plan where the electronic banking or other forms are the most commonly used forms, then it's entirely, there's no extra steps they need to do. They just need to go online, make those payments through their bank, through their normal methods, at whichever point they're comfortable between the end of April or the end of June in this case. If someone is in a pre-authorized program, then the direction and the suggestion we're going to be making is they don't need to necessarily come and give notification to the town. They just need to go and put a stop payment at their bank on that pre-authorized transaction. And then we'll waive any fees on our end in terms of when we see it in the processing later on.
Councillor Malboof, any further?
No, that's fine. That clarifies it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chalmers?
Thanks, Your Worship. Fully supportive of what is being proposed. A couple questions, though. I guess the first one is around our overall financial situation, and you talked about about $1 million hit at this point. Remembering that we balanced last year's budget on the use of capital reserves, and I'm assuming we're proposing using the stabilization fund ultimately to deal with this. I realize there is a surplus from last year. Is it possible to keep council a little more informed in terms of timeliness on these financial matters? This is pretty serious. And I think that even, if you stick draft on it, Glenn, or something, make it confidential, whatever you choose to do. But, I'm a couple other organizations I'm very involved with that are also being hurt by this. And, we're almost in daily contact with the treasurers in those organizations. And I'm not suggesting that for a minute. With you, it's a much larger organization. But I just think that it's really important that council understands, and perhaps other staff, senior staff as well, obviously, what the ongoing ramifications are, even if it's like once a week or once every 2 weeks, so that we fully understand what we're dealing with.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think that's fair, and we can look to make sure we've got some form of financial update to council in advance of the currently scheduled April 27th date, which is where we'll naturally be bringing some of this. But I take your point, that is a long way out, and so we can come up with something in the interim.
Second thing is, I applaud what the federal government has done and the provincial government in terms of their efforts to support the business community. But I think it's important, the questions I'm getting, people really don't understand what is out there, what is available to them. And it may be advisable on the website, our website, in addition to, what you're about to announce, if this passes tomorrow, what other opportunities taxpayers have, whether they're commercial or residential, for support from both levels of government, so they understand the total package. Is there any possibility of that, or are you already contemplating that?
Yeah, I will take that. I think that's fair, and I can take that back for discussion with our communication staff as to, I know right now we do have links for other purposes to other levels of government. We can take a look to make sure that if there's opportunities on the financial side, that we can do that.
If I could maybe, Andrew, our CEO, maybe just on that point, Andrew.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're also, just so you know, on the non-residential side of things, economic development has been working with the Chamber of Commerce and the business community to make sure they're aware of the kinds of resources that are available to them. And so that's something we're going to continue to do on the non-res side of things.
Councillor Chalmers, the floor is still yours.
And there's an opportunity, I think it's fairly obvious, for massive fraud federally and provincially with respect to this program. And just to throw out some numbers, just on the business side, which I think would reflect on the residential side as well. So basically 1/3 of Canadian business today, it's business as normal, as usual, they're not impacted. 1/3 are partially closed and 1/3 are shut down. And I think it's really important that we not be afraid to ask some questions with respect to this, because we are going to be impacted negatively by this. And will people attempt something? Some will. There's always a few out there that do. We've seen it in the past. And I think we also should be encouraging Miltonians who aren't affected by this directly to continue to pay their taxes, because it's going to help us get out from underneath this is much faster than normal if those who can pay, whether they're commercial or residential taxpayers, do pay. And I suspect the federal government and the province also have the same message coming as well with their programs.
And just on that last point, Councillor Chalmers there, I know I've had conversation with Glenn and as well with Andrew there, in encouraging individuals that can pay to pay. So that's well underway, and hopefully the community steps up to the plate in that regard. Now, on a couple of those other observations that Councillor Chalmers had made, Glenn, just wonder if you have any comments on his observations.
Yeah, we agree that where there is ability to pay, that's one of the benefits of leaving the due dates where they are for the month of April. And we can have related messaging, but that certainly was contemplated in deciding to approach the program the way we did.
Councillor Chalmers? Okay, Councillor Tessa Dirksen.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks staff for the report. I'm supportive of it as well. I'm just trying to anticipate some questions that we might be getting from residents, more on kind of the logistical side that Councillor Malbuff was asking about. I'm thinking particularly about folks who have their taxes collected by their mortgage lender. Oftentimes people will pay their taxes with their mortgage payments. Just wondering if there's been any discussion about how that would be coordinated with the banks, particularly if the banks end up deferring the mortgage payments, as we have heard the big six are looking to do. Has there been any talk or discussion about that?
There is. It is addressed in the frequently asked questions from the perspective of right now, the due date indicated to the mortgage companies is still the April 30th. So our hope would be that we would still see that funding being flowed through to the town. I am aware that mortgage companies and banks are providing different options to individuals themselves on things like mortgage payments. So between the bank and the individual, there may be some alternate forms of timing available, but in terms of our direct relationship with the mortgage companies, we do hope to see the transmission or the submission from them still on a timely basis, ideally.
Thank you. Second question, if I may, and this might not be one you can answer easily, but nobody really knows how this is going to play out or how long this is going to affect the economy, affect the ability of people to work and to pay their mortgages and pay their taxes. We have some indication out of China that we may be looking at the summertime, so that would coincide with the June date. Has there been any talk about a contingency plan if things don't shape up as quickly as hoped or get worse? How long can we fiscally sustain property tax deferrals is my question.
Right. So the framing of it now, it has really focused on the April timing, knowing that we're going to have a second report in the next cycle or two that will deal with what would normally be a June and September timing for the final installments. And given that we're pushing this one to June, likelihood is we'll be talking about different timing for those. Ideally, we would see the ultimate collection still occur within the calendar year that it's associated with. And we did try to just have some language in the report that did speak to the fact that when it comes to things like income support, the social assistance side, other levels of government have more of a mandate, more of a financial resource base, and are really more focused on those aspects of kind of some of the equalization factors here. We are trying to balance what tools we have that we can help individuals and residents with the fact that at the same time we have services to provide, and this is our primary revenue tool for that. So we have thought about what those next steps would look like. It has not gone to a point where we've looked at scenarios where there is no, or where there is revenue kind of push beyond the fiscal year that it's related to at this stage.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Ali.
I have two questions. Glenn, when you were talking about the surplus we have that we will be using to mitigate the $336,000 that we spoke about, you also mentioned gas tax fund, and I just would want to know the number for that. And also on page 5 of this report, it says it is hoped that a number of ratepayers will still make the April installment payment on time. And this is just going to be a continuation of what Councillor Challoner said, that when we send out that press release, that there should be clear wording in their communication in there talking about how people who can pay should be paying. So that's what I wanted to point out.
So yes, I agree, and we will work to make sure that it's clearly indicated from a timing perspective, and also just the ability that is an opportunity. Just as I'm speaking here, I'm just trying to pull up the number specific to gas tax, as that was just a number that we recently received. If you just give me 1 second here, I'm just scrolling to it. And the total is $213,000 extra this year, compared to what we would have projected in the budget process.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hamid is the last speaker that I have at this moment. Councillor Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Most of my questions have been answered, but it goes without saying that I support what's being proposed here. We are in uncharted territory. It's good to know that we have the $1.2 million surplus from last year to work with. But I wanted to underscore Councillor Challoner's request and say that I would like to get regular cash flow updates, because I think it's really important for us to know what's going on. That said, you mentioned winter reserve and gas tax. Question, should we not leave the winter reserve for that purpose, because we don't know what next winter is going to be like? And gas tax, what do we normally use gas tax for?
Yep. So I apologize if I misspoke. It's not the reserve itself, it's the in-year savings that I was referring to. So we do hope, because of the winter conditions, things like the cost of actually going out clearing snow, it hasn't been as heavy of a year. So we're still figuring out exactly what those numbers look like, but we do anticipate some savings there. Provincial gas tax does have to be used for the transit program specifically. So the additional funding, normally what would happen is we would put it in the provincial gas tax reserve. and then through the budget process, figure out, is it best to strategically use it for a one-time thing on the capital side or to build it into our operating base? In a year like this, where if we know we're going to have additional one-time pressure, if it is one-time funding from the gas tax program, the operating costs are eligible and we could use it on a one-time basis there.
And we'll probably have to, because our revenue from transit fares are going to be much lower this year than past years. And I expect gas tax next year to be much lower as well, because people aren't driving all that much anymore. That's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
And again, I have Councillor Rick D. Lorenzo on the line. Rick.
Yes, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So one question I had is, it's more of a comment. Right now, it seems to be fairly difficult to get in touch with the banks. I've tried to call my bank to just stop a mortgage payment, and some of the banks have an online way, some of them don't. So as we get closer to the April 30th date, in the FAQ that gets sent out, I think we need to keep in mind that the banks are being hit with a lot of requests. And just like my bank, RBC in Milton right now, says they have no schedules in the next 5 days for me to speak to them about any changes. So I know April 30th is a way off, but depending on someone wanting to make a stop payment, I think we may have to make sure that they realize they have to get in touch with their bank sooner rather than later, because the banks are having some trouble responding with the large amount of inquiries and phone calls they're getting right now.
Right. And we'll take that back, and it is a good point, as we've heard of a number of, not just with banks specifically, with a number of companies right now with the volumes. I can say on a note for council that with respect to our lines and the tax lines especially with the help of IT, with some things we've done to be able to connect more remotely, we are keeping up, and our response times are really strong on our end. But I take your point that others are having issues, and we'll flag that in the FAQ as well.
Councillor Di Lorenzo, any further?
Thank you.
Any further speakers on this item and this resolution? Okay, I'm going to read the resolution out. I've got it moved by Councillor Chalmer and second by Councillor Malbu. Be it resolved that the following fees and penalties be waived until June 30th, 2020 in recognition of the impacts of COVID-19. A, penalty interest as described in Section 5 of Bylaw 096-219-2020 pre-authorized tax payment program bylaw. B, penalty interest as described in Section 5 of Bylaw 119-219-2020 interim tax levy bylaw. C, overdue tax notice fee as presented on Schedule H of Bylaw 071-2019 user fee bylaw. Check co-refile fee as presented on Schedule H of Bylaw 071-2019, known as the user fee bylaw, for cases related to the collection of property taxes. E, dishonored payment fee as presented in Schedule N of Bylaw 071-2019, user fee bylaw, for cases related to the collection of property taxes. And that, members of council, is a resolution properly moved and properly seconded. Is there any questions with regards to this motion? And again, I will assume that it is carried unless I hear otherwise. Motion carried unanimously. Now, moving on to item number 2, with regards to items for consideration, I have a motion moved by Councillor Cluett, second by Councillor Hamid, and be it resolved that whereas procedure bylaw 007-219 provides that notice of motion shall not be discussed or debated upon introduction, but shall be included on the next regular council meeting agenda for consideration. And whereas section 7.9.3 of the Town of Milton Procedure Bylaw 007/2019 as amended permits a notice of motion to be considered upon its introduction by an affirmative vote of 2/3 of members present. And whereas it is deemed impractical or not in the best interest of the Town of Milton to delay consideration. Now therefore be it resolved that this pertinent rules contained in section 7.9 of Procedure Bylaw 007/2019 be waived to permit the introduction and consideration by council of the notice of motion on council agenda pertaining to support of conservation authorities. And again, Councillor Cluett, do you have anything to add? Seeing that you're the mover of this, and Councillor Hamid?
No, that's pretty self-explanatory.
Councillor Hamid?
Nothing for me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any further questions on this motion? Again, keeping in mind that it is 2/3 required. Any objections to this? Hearing none, I will assume that it's carried unanimously. Motion carried. Motion moved by Councillor Cluett, second by Councillor Hamid. Be it resolved that whereas the municipality of Milton is a member of Conservation Hall, the Credit Valley, Grand River Conservation Authorities, and is represented on their board of directors. Whereas the municipality appointed board of directors determine the policies, priorities, and budgets of the CAs. And whereas the municipality of Milton has been well served by these conservation authorities. And whereas the CAs are watershed-based organizations providing programs and services that contribute to a safer, sustainable environment and address climate change. And whereas the CAs have flood management programs employing a watershed-based approach that monitors stream flow, water levels, and climate condition forecast, flooding issues, flood warnings, regulates development activities and natural hazards, educates the public about flooding, operates flood management infrastructure, protects natural cover, and manages stormwater that helps reduce the impacts of flooding. And whereas the CAs are partners with municipalities in developing the science and policy to manage drinking water source protection. And whereas the CA owns, manages, and operates a valuable network of conservation areas that provide access to green space and family-friendly recreation activities for our growing communities. Contributes to the local economy, provides jobs for youth, and promotes health and wellness for our residents. It also provides outdoor experiential education to local school children and encourages communities to embrace and value our natural and scenic assets. And whereas conservation authorities undertakes reforestation, landscape restoration, and aids landowners to make changes on their properties in support of naturalization or water quality protection within the watershed. And whereas conservation authorities provide the region with technical expertise in support of its planning and infrastructure delivery, education, and health programs. And whereas conservation authorities are important partners in on the ground and cost-effective initiatives to address climate change. And whereas the municipality has service agreements with each conservation authority for planning and other services. And whereas conservation authorities must be able to charge fees and derive revenues from its facilities, programs, and services as appropriate to reduce the burden on the tax levy. And whereas the Ontario provincial government has cut 50% from the $7.4 million natural hazard transfer payment grant, Section 39, to Ontario conservation authorities that supports flood and erosion control infrastructure, flood forecasting and warning watershed planning projects and technical studies. And the new act has effect on downloading additional responsibilities to the conservation authorities to be paid for by municipalities. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the council of the municipality of the town of Milton requests the provincial government restore or improve their funding of conservation authorities to provide a more stable funding base that would prevent further downloading of costs to municipalities and allow maintenance of hazard programs. That the provincial government ensure that the programs and services of conservation authorities maintain their watershed focus and allow for the flexibility of including programs and service important to local circumstances. And that the province include experts from conservation authorities, staff of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, Environment Conservation and Parks, as well as Municipal Affairs and Housing and municipalities when developing the draft regulations. And that the province not dictate the form, content, or duration of the MOUs or agreements allowing for municipalities to support non-mandatory programs in a manner that suits local circumstances. And further, that this resolution be forwarded to the Premier, the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, the Minister of Natural Resources, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, all local MPPs and local conservation authorities and associations of municipalities of Ontario. And members of council, that is the motion that's before our members of council. Any questions? Councillor Chalmers.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just want to know where the mover and seconder got this resolution from.
I believe it was me that initially started this, but seeing that I'm in the chair, I thought it only appropriate. To the best of my knowledge, every municipality that's serviced by conservation authorities is passing a resolution much to that same effect. And we've been encouraged by Conservation Halton and of course the Grand River and as well the credit. So I'm not sure, John, what the Grand River is doing, but it's my understanding that all conservations are asking to do what we're doing here. So for Councillor Clute and Councillor Hamid, you're both on Conservation Halton with me, movers and seconders. So you got any thoughts? Councillor Clute, first to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to further to John's question, we are, conservation authorities across the province are urging municipalities to pass either very similar or identical motions to the provincial government because the reviews that are still underway. And I know that the focus of the government right now is kind of diverted, but we still have to maintain these timelines as going forward when they're making these possible changes to what conservation authorities can or can't do.
Yeah, seconder, do you have any further? And again, a member of Conservation Halton.
Yeah, no, Mr. Mayor, I have nothing to add on what you said, what Councillor Clute said.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler, back to you.
Yeah, so I'm supportive in principle, Your Worship. As you know, I sit on GRCA on your behalf. But there's three things I think that need to be made clear. The first thing is conservation authorities are creatures of the province. And so ultimately, they're there to enact legislation that is provincial legislation. The second thing is, while nobody enjoyed the cut that the conservation authorities had to deal with this year, they all survived. GRCA still ended up with a surplus. And I guess the third thing is we've had our challenges with some of the conservation authorities over the years in terms of development and management. And I think that it's healthy, quite frankly, recommended, if I was to be asked by the province, that in fact they do a review, every 5 years or so, because while it has been painful, no doubt, for some conservation authorities, it's been, I think, a good exercise. And the reality is that all of the conservation authorities have been represented at the table with the province of Ontario. There is a larger association of conservation authorities that sits at that table, and some of the larger conservation authorities like GRCA was at that table as well. So there has been the opportunity for input. They may not necessarily like the outcome. I guess we'll find out. But there has been that opportunity. So I think it's been a healthy exercise. That said, I understand the concern that's expressed in this resolution, and I support it because at the outset, it wasn't clear where the province was going, and it didn't appear that they were listening necessarily to the concerns of conservation authorities across the province. But I think that they are now. There has been that opportunity. And I would remind all my fellow members of council of the challenges we've had in Halton. And hopefully as a result of this exercise, things will be better in the future.
Any other member of council any further on this resolution of conservation authorities? Okay, I'm going to assume then, unless I hear otherwise, that this motion is carried. Anyone in opposition? Then this motion is carried. Thank you, members of council. Okay, just before I get to the bylaws here, under regional council update, any of my regional colleagues, anything that they would like to add at this point? I'm going to single out, first of all, Councillor Clune, have you got anything that you want to add? This is probably the best way to handle it.
Well, that's thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I guess as we've all seen, many of us have we had our regional council meeting, the first virtual meeting, very similar to this last week. That was handled quite handily by staff, and I also want to thank staff for getting this all arranged today for us and for the viewing public. But obviously, I also want to thank pass along thanks to our regional staff who, on a daily basis, sends us out regional council members that we forward off to everybody, the regular updates. We get them on a regular basis, and they're been doing a great job getting information to us. And I also wanted to pass along my thanks to the town staff, our senior management team, every employee who's working so diligently right now, either from home or at town hall. Mr. Mayor, I know that you see a few people working there, and I just want to pass along our thanks and for doing the job under these intense circumstances, and you know, just to let everybody know that we are going to get through all of this and keep up the great work.
Have you any further to add? Councillor Hamid, do you have any further to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, most of the meeting was about the COVID-19 issue and update, and talking about regional readiness. We did, as you know, approve some money for Acclaim Health, so that should be mentioned as well. Those interested can look into it further. But beyond that, it was all about COVID-19. So I want to echo Councillor Cluett's words and thank regional staff for they've done a remarkable job, as well as our town of Milton staff. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Melba, anything further?
Nothing further to add. Councillor Clune and Mead expressed everything I was going to say.
Thank you. And again, no pun intended, but I'm going to save the best for the last. Councillor Best.
Comments, just regard. Thank you, Your Worship, and similar comments to the other regional councillors. Just for everyone's information, for the public, the regional updates that are done twice daily now have changed, and very concerning today, 6 new cases in Milton and 9 in total, so it was a 30% increase. Also at a AMO board meeting on Friday, which raised a number of concerns, and Minister Clark was also attended and virtually, and also highlighted some of the concerns and making clear all the efforts. One one concern for staff. I've noted that the town of Pickering extended their closures to May 2nd, and the city of Burlington today just announced their program closures till June 30th, so something to concern. And also, as most of you know, there's also a Blue Ribbon campaign and a very public awareness of assisting each other. So it's very commendable to see the volunteers in the community helping out. But we're quite concerned that this may last longer than we expected.
And I think, Councillor Best, I think you're absolutely right there. Just to wrap up the regional council update there, at least in my opinion, I thought the very first regional electronic council meeting went very, very well there. So I want to thank staff not only locally here, but at the regional level, and as well Chair Carr. The 24 of us at the region, I thought we looked after some of the regional business quite efficiently and quite effectively there. So I want to thank my regional colleagues, not only locally, but across the region for doing a job well done. So with that, I thank you very much. Moving on, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Malbuff and second by Councillor Chalmers, and be it resolved the bylaws numbers 017-2020 through and including 025-2020 be read and passed in number. The mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Any questions on third reading of these bylaws? Assuming there are none, I will declare this carried unanimously. Now, just before I adjourn, we will be going into a confidential session, and there will be an approximately 2-minute break. Our solicitor will be joining us as well when we reconvene in camera there. But I just want to share with my colleagues, there's hardly a day goes by when my CEO, our CEO, Andrew Silton, and I were on a daily basis communicating with one another. And again, mentioned before about the skeleton crew that's here at the town hall. Most days I come over for an hour or two. And I know not only is it a skeleton crew, it's just a bare bones. I think there's probably, at the most, probably only 2 or 3 of us in this total building at any one time. So we try to keep things going as well as we can. Now, I know there was a request for a special council meeting back a few days ago, and I really appreciated that. But again, with consultation with Andrew and senior management team, we thought it wasn't necessary at that time. But keeping in mind that it's at the discretion of the mayor and the clerk, but also at the discretion of the majority of council at any given time, if the majority of us thought it was necessary. But I think it's going to be appropriate for all of us to do, as I refer to it, a bit of a post-mortem as to where we've been. We know where we're at, but where we're going to go in the future, I think is going to be critical. And there might have to be a special council meeting, not in camera certainly, but openly, to how we might deal with situations such as this, if they were ever to happen in the future. So, and again, we declared, and again with communications with all of my colleagues just prior to March 24th, when we see fit to declare a state of emergency, which was declared on March the 24th, along with total other 3 municipalities in Halton, along with the region of Halton, and of course, most other municipalities in the province of Ontario. So I just want to thank my colleagues for their understanding of where we've been, and we will talk about where we're going in the not too distant future. But before I adjourn this, I think it's only appropriate because at the head of a lot of what's happening, and I know at least once, if not twice a day, Andrew and his senior management team, they get together to discuss, as I refer, not only local affairs, but worldly affairs. So, Andrew, I think it might be wise if you were maybe just to highlight some of the things that, what has happened, what is happening, and maybe where we're about to go. So, Andrew.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just so members of council knows, I have talked to many of you individually. This would be the sort of first time we're together as a group, and I think individually you will all have understood that we have been taking our lead from the Medical Law Officer of Health at the regional level. The things that we've been trying to do that are important is to focus on the things that are at the town level, the local response to this crisis, to this emergency situation. And the third thing we've tried to do is we've tried to, as much as possible, stay in lockstep with our partners within the municipalities of Halton. That's not always easy, and it's not always appropriate for Milton, but we've used that as a guiding principle. So to stay in lockstep with what the other municipalities are looking for and looking at. In terms of goals, just quickly, we have 4 that have been in mind all the time for us. Is number 1, and most importantly, the safety of our staff. Number 2, the community safety and the safety of the community. Number 3, to try to keep the wheels of government and government business moving forward, which we see as an important step in this whole thing. And for any of you who I have spoken to, that hasn't been easy, but I think our staff are doing an outstanding job of trying to keep focused on that. And so, although there is not a lot of presence here at Town Hall, please know they are at home working very, very diligently on trying to keep our wheels of government moving. And then the 4th and most important one is serving our citizens as well as we can possibly serve them. And so those have been the things that we've tried to focus on in terms of what our guiding principles are, what the goals in this whole exercise have been. And I guess it's important for us to say, we've been in this situation for a couple of weeks now, and it has been intense, it has been acute, and things have changed on an hourly basis. And so I will like to thank council for their patience through this, for their support through this. And what I will want council to know is we've moved from this sort of acute hourly sort of planning timeframe to looking at what the future might hold. And so immediately we're looking at 30-day plans, 60-day plans, 90-day plans to try to determine what the direction will be. What are the things that we possibly can do? Where do the revenues come from, most importantly, and how we can be prepared for the 30, 60, and 90-day tranches going out. So thanks, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity. We are moving from that sort of daily, hourly phase into trying to make some solid plans as to what we will do and how we will respond to the future.
Andrew, thank you very much. And members of council, I think it's only appropriate, at least in my opinion, if any of you got any thoughts, I've expressed some of mine. You heard Andrew, hopefully where we're going. Any thoughts or any direction that you would like to give us, me or Andrew there? So any comments is certainly, in my opinion, appropriate this time. Again, Megan, if she sees a hand go up there, if you've got any comments, whatever it might be. So anyone got any thoughts? I guess not at this moment, Madam Clerk, so we will move forward. So with that, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Chalmers and seconded by Councillor Malboof, and be it resolved that council convene into a confidential session to discuss advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communication necessary for the purpose with respect to a legal opinion received from a citizen group regarding the Reed Road quarry. And again, that's been appropriately moved and seconded. And as I mentioned earlier on, the solicitor will be joining us after we go into the confidential session. So you've heard that motion. Any questions? I will assume then there are none. I will make a mention that this is carried unanimously. And again, members of council and staff, we're going to take roughly a 2-minute break. and then we will reconvene. Now we're going to go mute, and then we'll come back in approximately 2 minutes. Thank you. See you in a couple minutes.